Today I'm sitting down with Kirk, a serial payments founder who's built, sold, and rebuilt in fintech more times than most people update their LinkedIn. Kirk co-founded When Then, a payments orchestration platform that MangoPay acquired for a web-hotted 45 million euros. He then served as a chief product officer at MangoPay before leaving to start Grant, an AI-powered trust network targeting the $15 trillion B2B trade market in construction, manufacturing, and trade supply. Grant just closed a $5 million pre-seed led by 20 VC, and Kirk tells me the round came together in a single weekend. He also invests in startups and previously won product innovation at Mastercard, working with the likes of Target, Citibank, and Disney. Speed, trust, and repeat founders who know how to move. That's what this episode is about. Let's get into it. All right, Kirk, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'm super excited that you are here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for inviting me. How are you?
I'm also fine, thank you. It's Friday. Finally, spring is coming to Germany as well, so I'm super excited. In the last weeks, it was cold, gray, and rainy, and it's April already, so I was a little bit pissed.
It's funny, I have a perception of Germany of being cold, grey, and rainy for a large part of the year. A bit like Ireland, right?
But Kirk, you are located in Ireland. I thought the weather there is like also rainy and cold.
That's what I mean, yeah. I mean, we've got German investors as well, right? So we do a trip to Berlin every now and again. So,
Okay, nice. Next time let me know, because I'm also often in Berlin, so I would love to see you in real life, and then we can do another episode directly.
Sounds good.
I have one question, and obviously I prepared for this podcast very well. We already had like one call, and I would like to understand better the background of how you work with your other co-founders, because I saw that you work together with two co-founders and you do like multiple businesses with them, or the secret to not killing each other by venture number 3.
You know, I think a large part is knowing what each other is supposed to do and own, and that being true to yourself about that, right? So I've known Dave and Eamon since we met in Mastercard, probably about 12 or so years. And the both of us sat on an R&D bench. But even in that kind of setup, they had different roles and we had different roles, right? So they were both engineers, but work on different sides of the business. I was on the product side as well and the customer facing side. So I suppose we always knew who was going to play that product customer facing type role. Who was going to work on heavy infrastructure and architecture, and who was going to work on the functional engineering. And so knowing what your role is, what your job is, and what good looks like when you do that role is incredibly important. And leaving egos at the door. There's no egos in our team. We're just not allowed to have it. We just actually spent the last week together in a small house in Dublin hacking.
Oh, that's so cool.
So it's not only like, unless, we know each other 12 years, we know how to work together. We don't need to be together. But there's points in time, even when you've worked with someone for so long, you kind of forget the human element when you're working so remote. Dave is elsewhere. So there's no better feeling to remind yourself that you're in business with a friend as much as with a co-founder, right? And the best way to do it is have some human touch with somebody, right?
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, like building a business can be super lonely. So it's great when you can build something with a friend. That's of course super hard.
On that point, I'd say it's still lonely as a CEO, right?
Yeah.
There's no misunderstanding amongst Dave and Eamon that I'm the CEO.
Yeah.
I have to make hard decisions and I have to steer the ship in the right direction. And they'll give me every bit of propulsion and support to make that ship go faster. And we will discuss big strategic things, but at the end of the day, it does fall to me to make the decisions, and they respect that and they understand that. So, that is lonely. Even when you're surrounded by great people, it can be quite lonely, right? So I'm not gonna disregard the loneliness when, stuff does hit the fan and it does get hard and you're able to vent with somebody and it doesn't have to be someone else in the team and you don't have to be particularly careful about what you say and how you say it. And you can be totally open. It's great to have someone like that beside you.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think I have a lot of questions, especially about the very difficult decisions you made during your business life already, but we will come to that a little bit later. I have a question. You are based in Dublin, or the companies you are building are based there. So I just want to understand, like, why is Dublin or Ireland so attractive for fintech companies? Like Stripe is there, Finergo, and now Grant. Like, what is like the background of the city?
I think people often misunderstand fintech overall, actually, So, I mean, Stripe, absolutely Irish co-founders, but originally set up in San Francisco. That's its headquarters, Not to take anything away from it, but that's the facts. And there are great companies that come from Ireland. Most, fintech is its own discipline, and it's obviously a highly regulated environment. And I think Irish people are deeply respectful of regulation and environments. We're very vocal, outspoken people. And we do like to stand behind morals and standards. That's an important part of our characteristic. So there is that element. But, in general, Irish people are great salespeople. And some of these companies you just mentioned are not the easiest business to sell beyond, right? If you built a product in fintech like Fernergo or Fexco or some of these fantastic Irish companies, a large part of what you built needs to be sold. It needs to be sold to the enterprise. Actually, what you tend to find is, as much as it's deep tech and it's bound by tight regulation, it's actually very hard sales and very hard sales cycles. So I think a large part actually comes back to Ireland's great enterprise sales force that we have. By their nature are good storytellers and good at sales. And that's why you've got large sales functions, not just in fintech, but other multinationals in Ireland too, right? So if you want to try find that perfect symbiotic setup where you've got, respect for regulation, building hard, deep tech at an enterprise level and great salespeople, you kind of get a nice unity. And obviously you only need one company to be successful at a fintech level in Ireland for others to go, oh, I know how that's done. I'll give it a go myself, And I think that's what you're starting to see now. A lot more great Irish startups come with that kind of fintech mentality because they've worked in some of the great fintech companies.
Yeah, makes sense. And Kirk, you just mentioned a little bit about enterprise. So I would like to speak a little bit about your background. You worked for quite some time at Mastercard, which is obviously one of the biggest payment companies on the planet. And I would like to understand how that transition was for you, like day one when you decided to quit Mastercard and start like a startup. Obviously, it's like a completely different life. So I would like to understand how this transition went.
First and foremost, I found my way into Mastercard because of a startup. And, I don't think Mastercard really knew what to do with me either. They brought me in. I was like, you've kind of got a product role. We'd like for you to, do some product innovation inside of Mastercard Labs, which is a very special environment to be able to do something. What was created there and the cultivation of innovation that was created was really remarkable inside of a large company. So I was brought into Mastercard Labs. I was given a general product role, and then a new function opened up called Mastercard StartPath, which is a Mastercard startup function.
So was it like scouting startups and try to embed them into your ecosystem?
Yeah. I mean, Mastercard believed, as part of Mastercard Labs, because again, it was a special vehicle to be able to deploy some of Mastercard's newer technologies out into the market. And, be able to circumvent the large enterprise sales cycles that you typically find with some of Mastercard's other products, which sold to banks and telecos and large retailers. Mastercard had other services they wanted to get into the ecosystem. And so when they looked at who were the most prime customers for those services, they looked at the fintech categories and the fintech companies, and startups are obviously brilliant for that too, right? So they said, okay, well, let's try get some early adoption of some of our services out there and build a program around supporting startups while doing so. So really it was around, can we deploy products, people, and processes and know-how to the startup community and actually help them accelerate their fintech product development cycle. And I literally I think it was the first cohort we had the likes of Revolut in there and some other fantastic companies who were a very, very young company at the time. And so it was really, really successful. It was the makings and the shape of almost like an accelerator. We'd give capital, we'd give access to expertise and products. It would be a defined period of time. And then if an investment opportunity arose, then we'd love to support in that way. My time coming into Mastercard was still my time in Mastercard was very much still startup orientated. And then, we had to go find corporates to partner with those startups. And then that's where my role kind of morphed into, can you go work directly with the banks and the retailers and help them see innovation? And by doing so, bring startups along on that journey and introduce those startups to those large corporates. So a really fantastic time. But I came from startups. I went in, I did kind of startup stuff inside of Mastercard, and then I got back to startups. So startups is really all I've ever known, to be honest with you. At a professional level, it's all I really ever, and I've known, it's all I've ever done, really. So it was only a matter of time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also worked for quite some time at N26, when they were super small and young. And in the beginning, I can still remember that they worked together with a bank in Germany called Wirecard. I'm not sure if you heard about it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and this is like so interesting, obviously, because all that weird stuff was happening, and they also became a unicorn, so not Wirecard, but N26, and that was a very exciting time. So I fully understand and see your passion for fintech. I think it's a great industry to be in, especially right now.
Yeah, I think it's, the beauty about fintech is it doesn't change, yet it changes so much. Everybody thought, different forms of currency and exchange would really take grip in the industry, but you still see that the same rails are the same rails. So innovation does happen, but it happens more at the customer experience there still. And it's maybe some of the middleware, of course, but the core ledgers and the core stacks is the exact same thing. So it's a fantastic industry. It's kind of a dangerous industry if you get into it and you just think you can build something nice on top and hope it all works out. It's funny you mentioned number 26 because I was hounding the co-founders number 26 to join the Mastercard Start Pack program at the same time.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, I remember flying into a party in Berlin to try and meet with them and try to say, come on guys, we'd love for you to be part of the program. This is what we're offering. It's not like a startup accelerator or whatever else.
Kirk, I have a question about your own background, because I saw on your profile that you also invest in companies, and we just briefly spoke about that. You mentioned that you focus right now on investing in your own business instead of investing in new startups. But I would just like to ask, do you think it really helps or changed somehow how you raise capital for your own companies just because you know how to invest in a company as an investor as well?
If I'm honest, the type of investor I am is I look to people I trust who are making or leading the investment and for them to do their diligence and really look at opportunities from a position of, can I provide some strategic support to help accelerate that company's position? That's really it. So it's not like I was assessing these companies from a diligence perspective and an opportunity perspective. And any investment I have made, I've kind of looked at people who've been leading around and I've trusted, but it wasn't something that I really set out to do and go out with intent to really operate, Does it change, I suppose, how I raise money or how I intend to raise money from startups? I mean, it helps from a network perspective for sure. And I suppose once you're demonstrating trust and credibility in the market amongst people like that, then they tend to trust you to do the right thing with their capital and whatever you intend to do. So that does massively help. But, I've really taken a step back since founding Grand. I haven't wrote any angel checks. I do strongly believe any bit of time I have can't be diluted. It has to be absolutely focused into Grand. And I ask myself, whenever opportunities still do come, and I obviously have a look or think about it or give feedback to a VC on it, but I think about where that 25k or 50k or 100k is better invested. And I can't think of a better place than Grand.
Yeah, that's nice. And I fully agree. Obviously, why should you put that money into other companies when you know exactly what you could do with the money in your own bank account for the company?
It's a bit harder to get that money into the company when it's your money because, rounds are done and everything else like that. But the principle matters. The principle matters. Like if you could take that money and do something with it, what would you do with it? And I think that's the right framing. It's not really about trying to get 25k into the cap table of Grand right now. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. But the principle of what could you do with it if you did have it, and really around time dilution.
I just went outside for a little walk in my lunch break, and I actually already thought about what we discussed in our preparation call. So when you mentioned that you spent that money or you want to invest it more in your own business. So for me, it's also like if you would invest that money into another business, it's obviously not then you who is responsible to build that business up, but you mainly invest then in the founder who will build it. And I don't know how it is in your company, but for me, it's always when I put a lot of attention on a topic, like, for example, my LinkedIn account, I directly see that it helps. And in that time where I put that attention on that, my audience is growing, I get higher impressions, but then the next week I focus suddenly maybe on sales calls or converting like some investors. And I directly see, my LinkedIn is not working again. And I think like also if you invest in a company, it's somehow similar. Obviously you are looking for the top 1% of people who are also as motivated and maybe similar as you are when you build your own business. But for me, it's like still a little trust issue if I think about that sometimes. Or how do you feel about that?
Do you mean like the trust from a perspective of, do I trust who I'm investing in?
Yes.
If you're an angel investor in a startup at a pre-seed round, less involved is an understatement, right? Like you'd be lucky to get an investor update. And so unless you have a direct point of contact or you've built a relationship with who you're investing in that they can reach out to you, you have no real avenue of information on what's actually happening in the business. That's just the reality of angel investing at an early stage. Of course, you can ask, the VCs or investors that introduce you to that company at one point in time for information, but that's the reality. I think, you either have to approach angel investing in two ways. Either you can bring a lot of value beyond the capital, intrinsic value, and, of course, you need to have time to do so, or else you can make the investment and forget about the investment you've made and hopefully in return. But that's a life of angel.
This is interesting. Do you actually think like people, or specifically angels now, do they invest for the purpose of an investment so that they really believe in the beginning that they can multiply their own money? Or do you think it's more something like philosophical, maybe, that they want to do venture, they want to support an industry? Is it more like mission driven? I asked that question now as well because I then checked my portfolio when I was also for outside, and I just thought, wow, this is so easy. Like if you invest in shares and ETFs, you can just see like how much value you have. But if you are an angel investor, like you don't, as you said, you don't even get these updates.
If you're out there putting your hard-earned capital to work in companies because of a philosophical or an emotional tie, you shouldn't be an investor. You shouldn't be you shouldn't deploy capital. If it's your own or someone else's money, that's just, to me, ridiculous. You have to be in there to make a return. Otherwise, get involved in the company in a different way than putting capital into that company. Maybe, I don't know, maybe become a therapist. Maybe become a founder therapist and spend time on a psychological level and help them develop that way. But in terms of actually putting hard-earned money to work and not caring about it materialize, there's different degrees of caring. Like caring from a standpoint of, I would love for that to materialize and become something, but having the maturity to understand that early stage startup investment is complex and the likelihood of something happening or getting a return is incredibly slim. I think it's like the stats are still 90%, probably even more so now. 90% of startups fail. So you have to have this premise in mind of how you're going to operate from an investor perspective. But absolutely, for me, it's like, you should be getting into it and assessing it from a point of view of, can this return money? And if you can do anything along the journey of that company to help accelerate that, and by doing so benefit you, introductions, spending time on product with them or whatever you can do, fantastic. From my perspective as a founder, spending time with something or working on product can only be grand. It can only be grand. If I have to make an introduction email to somebody for another company, the first question I need to be asking myself is, who should I be emailing instead right now about brand? It's that kind of clinical, unfortunately, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, interesting. Let's maybe from here speak a little bit more about your companies and also your funding rounds, because I saw you have done a lot here already, and I think the first funding round that you did was for the company When Then, right? So you raised for that company the first round.
Government-like funding in Ireland for other ventures, which didn't really materialize, so successful failures, as I like to call them. Tons of learning. The first company we raised capital for was When Then. We had a very successful fintech advisory business, myself, David Eamon, post Mastercard, which was entirely bootstrapped and for what it was and what it did and the capital and the revenue it made, it was a great business. And COVID came along and left us, twiddling our thumbs, saying, well, what do we do now? The work had dried up, people had stopped spending. The business wasn't at risk, but, our time and our boredom was at risk. So we're like, we better go do something else. So we started When Then within that COVID period. And quite soon into probably about 3 to 4 weeks into that, Fabian at what once was Cavalry, which is now NAP, reached out to us. A+ prospecting on LinkedIn.
I have to ask a question here, Kirk, because you mentioned so they reached out to you, but how did they even know about?
I think, I think I was joking because I always advise startups inside of Mastercard, and then we work with a lot of startups with our fintech advisory consultancy business as well. I always kind of had playbooks, I suppose, that I'd help the startups with, when they kept raising capital, whatever else. And it's funny, like the number one playbook, if you have a good CV that's publicized online, the number one playbook for any great company is just put stealth mode startup in your profile. Again, you need to have credibility to back that up. You can't be the stealth mode startup and you have no profile, no one's ever heard of you. That probably won't. But if you come from decent brands in any role really, and you put stealth mode startup, you're going to get inbound. You really are.
This is interesting because honestly, I'm always a person who is criticizing everything who is in stealth mode. Like I actually did a couple of posts about that topic because I am always a big believer in going out there as fast as possible, but I know it probably depends on the industry. If you build something where you first need to build the technology and you need to, of course, keep that secret so that competitors can't copy that, then it makes sense. But I see like a lot of software companies, they can just go out, speak to their clients to improve their product, but they don't. And then they come out of stealth, they publish something and they notice, oh, nobody actually asks for that. So, but of course, it's like a different situation. So what was like the reason then for you?
Well, we knew we needed to raise capital, and we could either go fishing or leave the bait out. And so we left the bait out. It was a strategic decision to put stealth mode in. We knew at some point in time someone was going to come knocking, right? So I could go out there and I could cold email, which is, despite what all investors say, it's a really poor way to reach an investor. Warm introductions obviously is better. Doing something that can't be ignored is even better again. So we literally left the bait out. We deliberately strategically said, let's put stealth mode up. It's not like we intended to be in stealth for long, like a couple of weeks. I do agree with you to an extent on, should you have stealth mode up? This whole notion of someone's going to copy your idea, more often than not is ludicrous, particularly if you're trying to disrupt an incumbent industry that's been around for so long, that tends to design their roadmap for 2026 in October 2025, and then has to go back to the board in Q1 and Q2 and say, hey, we need to adapt our roadmap that I told you in October because we found a new startup, and the board is asking how successful that startup is, and you can't articulate that because you have no KPIs or data to go by. It doesn't really make sense in those types of industries. You might as well go out there and make some waves. What it does do at times is it does help you to be very focused if you know exactly what you're trying to solve. If you know the problem you're trying to solve, you've got a clear articulation of the pain points, you've lived it. Don't worry about the outside or getting the job of work done. And just because you have stealth up on LinkedIn or you have a stealth website doesn't mean you're not doing customer discovery. You can have to be careful of what the facade looks like. What's actually happened behind the scenes can be very, very different. But if it is a fear of competitors taking your concept or idea, look at the industry you're in. If you're in a fast-paced, competitive industry, maybe be a little bit cautious. But if you're an incumbent industry that's, ripe for disruption and your nearest competitor is old, clunky, can't move fast, don't worry.
And that's great advice. I mean, you basically said who should be in stealth and who not. So I think that's quite valuable for everyone who's listening right now. When we now come back to the first investor who reached out to you, I think you mentioned Cavalry, right?
NAP now, yeah. NAP, yeah. But
let's speak about the process here. So they reached out to you on LinkedIn and then you had the first conversation with them. So you probably prepared the pitch deck or just had like a first chill conversation.
Very informal conversation with credit to Fabian inside of Cavalry. That's how the tone was set from the get-go. There wasn't formality in the communication from him. It was like, can we have a quick chat? Would love to understand what you guys are up to. And it's that informalities. If you go onto that call with a structured pitch deck ready to speak for 20 minutes, 2 slides, I think you've lost their interest. You haven't demonstrated enough emotional intelligence for them to consider you from the next point of view. And that's a very harsh position, but that's kind of how I see it.
I like that because sometimes, and obviously, I'm not an investor, so we help companies to find investors or prepare for that. And when I have my first conversations, it's interesting. Some of our leads, they directly share the screen and they want to show us their pitch deck. And I always feel like super overwhelmed by that, like in a very negative sense, because I don't believe that this is now the right moment to show me the deck. I often review it after the first conversation, and I can imagine so much like how an investor would feel if you directly show the screen and you just run through the pitch deck instead of having a normal conversation and trying to connect more on a human level. And that's basically what you said, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, if it's the first touch point with someone, they want to understand your story without you needing a visual aid to communicate your story. If it's a little bit different, right? If you are in deep research, produced a publication, a paper, thesis on something, and you can demonstrate to investors that you're a real subject matter expert in this particular field, and the conversation is flowing nicely, and you want to dive in and really articulate or show what you've done and how you do it and what differentiates you, and you can show that in a very cohesive way quite quickly on a call, then that's impressive. Of course, introduction, I think that makes sense. But if you're literally going slide by slide and telling your story that you can't communicate without slides, probably something you should do.
So then I wish people have like big advantages, because you mentioned they are good in storytelling, they are good in sales, so that should help them to raise.
The big bias, I suppose, there is truth to it. It's almost like saying Germans are incredibly good at efficient processes, right? So it does help.
I love that. Kirk, how many conversations did you then have with this first VC until they gave you like a term sheet?
For when then? The first company?
So the first investor that reached out to you.
Yeah, Fabian. I probably think it was maybe 2 or 3 calls overall. over a very, very short period of time. It was a pre-seed round. It was pre-product. It was pre-revenue.
Process was probably quite typical how every VC operates. First conversation, then they presented this opportunity in their weekly call, and then you had the second call with more than one person.
Yeah, I think we probably would have met Claude, who was the managing partner, in there probably the second call. Pretty straightforward.
Do you have like any general advice for this specific round, pre-product, pre-revenue, speaking to early VCs or investors, anything that really helps to like make the process faster and more efficient?
Yeah, I think, I hear a lot of startups, talking about we're going to kick off our fundraising in 2 weeks' time and it's going to run for 6 weeks. And you're already setting yourself up in many respects for, as I see it, to fail. Because you're time boxing something as if it's a sales cycle. And I suppose the urgency to get it done and to demonstrate to your investors that this right now is a distraction for me. It's not my end goal to raise money. I need money to be able to accelerate the business. So I'm devoting this very fraction of my time. It needs to be accelerated. We need to get it done quickly if you want to get it done. I think this is the big advice I can give to companies. What's your expectations there? They're going to, drag it out. They're going to take their time. They're going to, do deeper research, come up with excuses or negatives. When it's pre-product and it's pre-revenue, you're only really judging people on, right? You should be able to raise at a pre-seed level based on a couple of calls directly with that individual. The concept's going to evolve. So you have to kind of set that tone from the get-go. This is what we think we're going to do. It may turn out like that, it may not. We want to get capital ASAP in the door so we can start testing and learning. Are you with us?
Urgency is probably a very important instrument you can then use as a founder.
Yeah, and then there's also, do you want to bed, so to speak, with that VC? Like, do you want to be married to that VC? And so you need to run your own tests as well, right? Particularly at a pre-seed level. You want to really see how if that VC or that investor is capable of working with a company at a pre-seed level, if they're not setting unfair expectations on that company. And so you can definitely do things on your side. One thing that we've always done is try get it done. If you have the right network, right contacts, but try to get it done over a very quick period of time and use the weekend as that period of time. It shows really if that VC will be there for you when you really need it. Because if you're working 24/7 or 100 hours a week and Saturday and Sunday is those hours, you really want your VC to be able to WhatsApp or message your VC and see if they're there. You really do, right? And a great way to test that is actually to run your actual run your round.
Oh, that's great. I love that. Practical to test it very easily for everyone. So that's great advice. I would love to speak a little bit now about the acquisition. And I already mentioned that in the introduction. So MangoPay came and they were interested in your solution that you built. So I would like to know, was that inbound or have you talked already?
It's Advent International, it's a private equity firm. Advent had bought MangoPay about 6 months before they had reached out to Wendell. From what I know, and I'll say what I know and I'll say what I can't say, and then I'll stop at points. But I think, there was a strategy to look at how does MangoPay enhance its pay-in capability, card processing capability. And as part of the strategy is there an orchestration platform there that can accelerate our roadmap? And I assume we were one of many that they reached out to. But it was pretty much led by Advent. And then, from there, it was quite quick after. Again, they moved incredibly quickly.
And I actually found a very interesting quote from you after the acquisition where you said something that you and your family was... Wait, I have to start from the beginning. So you said after the when-then exit that your financial security was more than you ever could ask for. And I would like to understand if this also changed somehow your own risk appetite for the next venture that you then started.
Yeah, I think, without taking out the small violin, when you come from a working class family and you've seen that family go through, financial distress over periods over that, 20, 30 year cycle, and the downturn being one, like money and financial security does play heavily in their mind. And so if an opportunity came along, it was different for me because we had a successful business beforehand. But still, if you had the opportunity to take something and then go long-term thinking of something else, I think it's a smart thing to do. It all comes back to how passionate you feel about the thing you're building at the time as well. If you feel that thing could be the long-term thing, fantastic, because it's incredibly hard to build a second business. So you have to think twice about whether selling is the right decision. But a lot of factors play into that. Obviously, financial security is a major thing. Passionate you feel about what you're building as well, if you genuinely believe that thing can be successful. But for me, and certainly for Dave and Eamon, it was nice to be able to say, let's put some security behind us, and who knows what the future holds.
How long did you wait then to build Rand, so the next business you're running right now?
So I suppose I promised myself when I left MangoPay that I'd take some time off.
You did not.
I'm having vivid conversations with family and friends around, I'm not going to do anything for 6 months, 9 months. And my good friend, who was the CEO of MangoPay at the time, he was taking a bit of time off as well, a year or so. And I remember him saying to me, take the time. I suppose I'm pretty impatient. So what felt like 6 months, 9, 12 months actually was a couple of months, probably 2 or 3 months. But I didn't really know the type of business I wanted Grand to be. So I really took the time to think about what I wanted to build and how I wanted to build it. You know, although it was started, the same intensity wasn't there. Dave hadn't come on board. It was a nice period of me being able to think about what does the last venture I ever built look. It wasn't long. It was probably about 3 months or so. But within those 3 months, and kind of probably how I operate and how I think, felt like 12 months. Within that 3-month period, it allowed me the time to go, right, is this the last venture I ever want to build or not?
So in the 3 months, you already started also somehow to think about your current business as it is, or was it more that you thought about like, hey, do I want to start something next?
It was a bit of both. I was doing some angel investing. I was thinking about, is this investing thing interesting to me? Maybe I should push on and maybe raise a small fund and do the solo GP type thing. So there's a bit of that. And then I was like, well, there's a couple of areas I think are particularly interesting that kept resonating with me based on, again, family backgrounds. I was like, well, that's kind of an interesting area, and maybe I have another build left of me. And yeah, like I said, it was, I talked to people and they'd laugh about me not building again. They're like, yeah, right. It's like, that's never going to happen. You're definitely going to build again. You're not just going to be a VC. You want to be an operator. You want to be a builder. And they were right. That's the truth of it. Like, you kind of, even when you've done what you've done and you've had the success you had, you still at times kind of are confused about who you are, because you're given too much time to think. So yeah, I think it was inevitable. It just wasn't inevitable to me until probably, I'd say, past Q1 into late Q2 of last year.
Got it. And Kirk, I would like to speak now about the next ways that you did. So before we start and speak about that, could you give me like an elevator pitch about what your current business Grand is doing?
Yeah, geez, an elevator pitch. It always depends on who your audience is. Who's your audience?
I would say mainly startup founders or investors.
We'll do the one that resonates with the tech. All right.
Yeah, perfect.
We're building for the real world, and I'd never say this to who I sell to, right? But our vision / elevator pitch is to build the fintech infrastructure for the real world economy. So if you think about what Stripe has achieved at the digital internet level, like very similar fintech infrastructure for the internet economy, because of Stripe's outrageous success and very, very deserved. A lot of other payments companies and fintech companies gravitated into their stratosphere. They're like, we should go up there because that's where we're winning and that's where they're doing great. And by doing so, they kind of left innovation at the table for the real world economy. They stopped innovating for the real world economy. And they just thought, whatever works for the internet will work for the real world. So I think about the built world. I think about the builders, merchants, the builder suppliers, the manufacturers of the world, the supply chain. And I think about how do you then take great fintech payment infrastructure down to them and what needs to be true for that to be successful for them. And you just look at fundamental things like, there's just a lack of connectivity into systems. They really left to defend and try to solve for themselves. Whereas, the internet companies get everything all kind of integrated and automated. So that's what we do. That's where we're focused. Our first product within that infrastructure is called Profile, Grand Profile. It's very much about how do you understand your counterparties that you do business with, both customers and suppliers. And if you can understand who they are and the relationship that you'll have with them, you can set things off in the right tone, and then payments and commerce can happen with trust across that ecosystem, right? So that's our first product. It allows you to profile your customer, your supplier, and then from there set up the terms of engagement with them. And the reason we focus there is because 60 to 70% of all money flows, payment flows, fintech word, they don't relate to that word, but fintech is around this idea that I've given somebody a product or service and they promise me that they'll pay. And so, we thought it'd be a nice place to start to see if we could prove that they actually will pay them and make sure that the right insight and intelligence is there around how they'll pay them and how they won't pay them. that becomes the backbone of the infrastructure that we're building.
Got it. I love it. Yeah, that's very clear. I definitely understand what you're building now. So thank you for that pitch. I would like to speak about your round now that you did with Grant. And in our call, you mentioned that you raised $5 million, a pre-seed round that was led by 20 VC. You also mentioned that you closed that round within a weekend. And I would like you to walk us through this weekend and what the process looked like, because one weekend is crazy.
I think that to understand how we achieved that at such pace, you kind of have to understand, what led up to it, right? So I'd worked with Harry Stebbings previously in Stride, which is a VC that Harry was part of, with Fred Destin. And we also brought in NAP into the round, which is Cavalry rebrand. So we worked with them and we went down as well. So the relationship has always been strong. And so really, I'd met with Claude a few times. We'd had a couple of chats. He knew exactly where I was at. Didn't really know if I wanted to go again or not, and everything else with that. And then I said, I'm ready. And he's like, okay, we're ready. And it was that simple. And then I WhatsApped Harry and I said, I think I'm about to go again. And he's like, let's chat. And credit to Harry and Kieran. They move incredibly quickly. As in, the WhatsApp of let's chat probably turned into a call about an hour later. I think that was a Friday. And then there was a call on Saturday. And then there's a call on Sunday.
So directly the strategy you mentioned earlier, having a call on the weekend.
Yeah. But, very much led by them too, right? Like a commonality, a common understanding of, this is a distraction for companies that are trying to find something to build or go ahead and or who are building or who are validating. They know that, the founders' times are incredibly important. So let's try catch them when they're least distracted with building and customer discovery, right? So that's what I mean by, I suppose, finding that right chemistry with your investors. So, Claude inside of NAP knows that too well. Kieran and Harry know that too well as well. And so they're very much prepared to do what I needed to do, which was get it done quickly. So.
Got it. And I mean, like 5 million pre-seed for 2026 is like meaningful capital. So I'm not sure if you can share that, but I would love to know what your burn plan looks like. Like, will you distribute the money mainly on marketing, or is it more for infrastructure? And also, how long does it last you?
Yeah, no, I probably won't talk specifics about the burn and how long it lasts, as we're very well capitalized for quite some time to come. So, where does it go? It goes in building, like we're an incredibly lean team. We're very attentive to customer needs, bang in the middle of onboarding customers, learning from them and then iterating. So as I just mentioned at the beginning of the call, we had myself, Dave and Eamon in a house in Dublin, working probably about 100 hours over the last 6 days, coding, hacking to try to deliver a new feature for a customer that said it would really impact how they work and improve how they work. And so we use our capital in spikes like that to get the job done quickly. And then we use it just to build, marketing and sales is done by me. And of course we've got infrastructural costs like everyone else, and AI isn't cheap either, right? So yeah, a bit goes in that. But in terms of the business, very well capitalized into the future, a very low burn rate too.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that, and also for your transparency here. We are already at the end of the episode, and I think that was great. Like, I loved everything so far. What would you say is like your biggest advice when it comes to fundraising in fintech? And do you see like any specific trends right now that shape the industry?
I mean, on the positive side, I see just this new caliber of young entrepreneurs who are coming through, what is happening right now is quite chaotic. Things are changing almost daily or weekly. And so it's noisy, but they seem to be so well balanced in how to approach the market and build what they're doing. So I think that's incredible. I think it's easy to say that it's easy to build in fintech in 2026 because all the information is available to you. I think you have to truly understand that when you're building in fintech, your regulatory compliance posture won't be solved through Claude Code or Claude Coworker, right? You will need to put operations in place. You will need to put people in place to be able to build in fintech. And so what my advice to people is, if you truly want to solve money movement, capital movement, or anything around the fintech category, then don't underestimate the work that needs to go in from an operational standpoint. It's quite heavy. And again, you can't go tell a regulator that the agent is doing it at the weekend for you, right? But if you get that right and you're willing to embrace it, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity out there. It really is. There's still so much still to be done. It's kind of untouched still. Like, what you see today, and it's fantastic, is the neo challenger banks still predominantly. But there's a lot of great opportunities to disrupt the incumbents that own the market today. So
I know I asked 2 questions, but I have another one that I would like to ask now. Like, how many fintech business accounts or in general accounts do you have? Like, do you have a lot of like neobanks on your phone that you are using just to test the market, or
I probably have a kind of strong in habits or behaviors now at this point of how I stay in touch with the market. I'm an avid reader every single morning from 6 a.m. of a couple of newsletters that come in. That's just a habit now at this stage, and at the weekends too. And then whatever I see that is particularly of interest and it's doing something different, I will download it and I will play with it. I'm in Ireland, so some of the great things aren't always available in Ireland yet because it's a small market. Yeah, I think probably at a fintech level, there's whether absolutely defined as fintech, probably 5 or 6 different applications, and then there's a whole broad spectrum of companies that are in one way or another fintech, or fintech enabled. So.
Same for me. Like, I'm not operating in fintech specifically, but I just love to try out these different solutions. So I think the market is changing fast, and it's great to see what others are building.
It's interesting, yeah.
Kirk, last question. What would you say is like your biggest advice when it comes to fintech fundraising?
If you're raising in fintech, don't be naive to some of the questions you'll be expected to answer by investors around how you intend to actually build a business that makes money in fintech. The business model of fintech is incredibly important. A lot of people underestimate, just think they'll just bring in a banking as a service platform, middleware platform, and don't understand the economics of how you make money in fintech. And a lot of the innovation actually is around the economics. Can you lower your default rates? Can you get a higher take rate in the payments? So just study how fintechs make money and just be able to not come and show 5-year financials or incredibly articulate business plans, but do understand where economics sit in fintech. And that's something that I would love to see that I don't see very often when I speak to fintech founders, or new fintech founders who spend no time in fintech. They just haven't bothered to understand how money is made in fintech, right? And there's only 2 or 3 pillars for where it's made. So beyond, I think most people can believe you can build a beautiful looking or a compelling proposition that capture customers, if it's done right and you hone in very specific features. It takes a lot to catch up. If you're building a neo challenger bank, like, good luck to you. It takes a lot to catch up to make those features. You could probably catch up better than most now because, AI can help you code 5 times quicker than what was available to any fintech or challenger bank 5 years ago. But you can't underestimate that every feature you see probably has some regulatory implication, right? And that's the bit that AI can't help. So I think it's just the basics of, if you're going to raise in fintech, understand the economics of fintech, have a general understanding of regulation. You get the economics wrong, and you get the kind of regulatory posture wrong. You get your burn rate wrong, and you've suddenly built nothing. It's 3 years later.
Look, thank you so much for all your advice. I think that was a great episode. I really loved the story and also what you built so far. So keep building. Good luck for your next venture, and speak soon.
Yeah, cheers to it. Thanks, man.